distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone to the second International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. My name is Yoon Hong-sun, and I'm very honored to be your MC for this conference tonight. Due to the COVID-19 situation, tonight's conference is held in a hybrid format with both on-site participants and online participants. It is almost 8 o'clock in the evening here in Seoul, so first of all, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to all our guests and participants in Korea for taking your valuable time to join us tonight. And also, we have attendees participating online, including YouTube and Zoom. I'd also like to extend my warmest thanks and welcome to all our online attendees. In 2018, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea has launched a new initiative which is called Action with Women and Peace to more actively contribute to the international discussion on women, peace, and security agenda and to participate in the global efforts to put an end to sexual violence in conflict. As part of this initiative, the first International Conference on Action with Women and Peace was held last year, July. And tonight, we are very proud to announce the opening of the second conference. We sincerely hope that tonight's conference will allow participants to share diverse perspectives and experiences on the theme of ending sexual violence in conflict, ensuring a survivor-centered approach. Before we proceed, please allow me to briefly give you an overview of tonight's program. During our opening session, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kang Kyung-hwa, will first deliver her opening remarks, which will be followed by congratulatory remarks and keynote speeches by our distinguished speakers across the globe. After a short break, the first session will begin on the theme of COVID-19 pandemic and sexual violence in conflict. Then, we will proceed with the second session on the theme of efforts and remaining challenges for a survivor-centered approach without any break in between the sessions. And after these two sessions, we will watch 3 award-winning films of the 2020 Global Youth Video Competition of Action with Women and Peace, and then proceed our last program, the closing session. At the end of each session, we will have a Q&A where the audience can ask questions to the presenters of the session. If you're here on site, please raise your hand to ask a question. If you are in the Zoom, please post your questions in the Zoom chat. Then we will select 1 or 2 questions from the floor and the Zoom chat. We kindly ask for your active participation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us begin the second International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. Before we move on, in order to congratulate our conference, the sound artist Matilda prepared a sound performance. Let us all watch. Thank you very much, Matilda. The show very well expressed the three main symbols of action with women and peace: a dove representing peace, a woman representing a survivor, and lastly, a butterfly that symbolizes international cooperation. Up next, we are honored to have our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kang Kyung-hwa, here with us as our first speaker to deliver her opening remarks. Please welcome her with a big round of applause.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. It's very delightful to be with you here today. High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet, Lord Ahmad, SRSG Pramila Patten, Dr. Denis Mukwege, Ms. Nadia Murad, Ms. Angelina Jolie, Special Envoy of UNHCR, ladies and gentlemen and friends. It is indeed a great honor for me to welcome all of you to the second International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. I'm very pleased to see many familiar faces from last year, whom I thank for joining us again. My sincere thanks also go to the new speakers and participants. We are very privileged to have you with us today. I regret that we cannot all meet in person due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we should be very grateful for the digital technology that enables us to meet virtually. The recent news of vaccines against COVID-19 has brightened the prospects for the end of the pandemic, but the far-reaching changes that the global public health crisis has brought about in our lives are likely to stay with us long after COVID-19 has been brought to its end, most notably that much of our daily activities and functions have moved to online platforms. Still, there are some fundamentals that we must safeguard and strengthen during and after this crisis, and that would certainly include the spirit of cooperation and solidarity across borders and ideologies that is urgently needed to overcome COVID-19, climate change, terrorism, infodemics, and other global challenges. It would also include the resolve and focus to combat the persistent blights on the shared dignity of humanity, and few more so than sexual violence in conflict. Thus, I am truly heartened by our hybrid, part in-person, part virtual gathering today. This year holds great significance, marking the 20th anniversary of the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. It is undeniable that the United Nations has been the central force in raising the global awareness of the effects of armed conflict on women and girls. Security Council Resolution 2467, adopted last year, articulating the need for survivor-centered approach in the fight against sexual violence in conflict, has been the latest edition in this endeavor. Yet, despite the significant advancements in the normative domain, the gap between the norms and the reality on the ground still remains very wide. In his annual report, Secretary General Antonio Guterres once again documents a harrowingly large number of cases of sexual violence in conflict and post-conflict areas. The report paints a somber picture of how sexual violence continues to be used as a tactic of war, torture, and terror to dehumanize, destabilize, and forcibly displace populations. The situation on the ground has been made worse by COVID-19. Invariably, the destructive impact of unforeseen crises falls disproportionately more on vulnerable segments of populations, including women and girls who are already subject to gender-based violence and discrimination. Disruptive crisis can also throw a harsh light on the fault lines and blind spots in society, which are then seriously and constructively dealt with. Thus, crisis can become an opportunity. Likewise, in many countries, COVID-19 has exposed the weakest links in the social fabric: migrant workers, sexual minorities, the elderly, and so on, compelling dialogue and policy solutions to address the related issues to their rights and needs. However, the opposite has been the effect on sexual violence. The increase in gender-based violence that takes place behind the stay-at-home and shelter-in-place measures to stop the spread of the virus has been alarming. In refugee or IDP camps, quarantines, curfews, and other restrictions on movement to contain the spread of COVID-19 exacerbates sexual violence, including increased intimate partner violence. The movement restrictions are also having a detrimental impact on the ability of survivors of sexual violence to access services. And even when the survivors do have access, they may be less willing to seek help because of fear of contracting COVID-19 and transmitting it to their families. Furthermore, as COVID-19 puts fragile governance, security, and rule of law institutions under great stress, conflict dynamics can get out of control and make it easy for parties to conflict to resort to the use of sexual violence and tactics or methods of warfare. At the first conference held last year, we had a chance to review the current status of the global endeavors to address sexual violence in conflict, taking note of the importance of the survivor-centered approach. And as follow-up to last year's discussions, I do hope that today's gathering will generate a rich exchange of insightful views and fresh ideas about how to put this approach into action, especially in these times of an unprecedented global crisis. Distinguished guests, the survivor-centered approach is about putting survivors front and center in our efforts to root out sexual violence in conflict and crisis. Ensuring the dignity of victims and survivors by heeding their voices is key to this approach. It starts with continued and in-depth communication rooted in patience, respect, and genuine empathy to accurately identify their needs and demands. The Korean government, in partnership with UN agencies, has continued to assist survivors and refugees facing unprecedented challenges exacerbated by COVID-19 in Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, and other places around the world. And in this process, we are firmly committed to ensuring that their voices be fully heard and honored. We have learned the vital importance of their voices from experience. The efforts of past governments to resolve the so-called comfort women issue had clearly lacked this, and thus the current government has redoubled our efforts to listen to the survivors, a dwindling number of elderly women in their 90s, their families and supporters, in all of our efforts to help restore their dignity and honor. And based upon my experience with the comfort women issue, as well as sexual violence in the ongoing conflict context in some parts of the world, I would like to highlight 3 points that I think are key in a survivor-centered approach. First, the rights of victims and survivors to reparation and other forms of redress should be fully defended and advocated. Since the adoption of the UN Basic Principles and Guidelines on the Right to Remedy and Reparation in 2005, the international community has made continuous efforts to materialize each form of reparations in concrete terms. But despite the normative progress, the actual provision of reparations remains, unfortunately, quite the exception. In this respect, I pay tribute to the leadership of Dr. Mukwege and Ms. Murad, co-founders of the Global Fund for Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, who are with us virtually, for their tireless work and dedication to establish an innovative and survivor-centered mechanism to ensure access to reparations. Korea became a board member of this fund this year, and we will continue to be actively engaged in its operation. Second, ending impunity and bringing justice to survivors should be a priority in a survivor-centered approach. Impunity is one of the main drivers of sexual violence in conflict and the fuel that keeps the cycle of violence going. Combating impunity means ensuring accountability for perpetrators and preventing further such crimes. It means having legal and judicial mechanisms for prompt and full reporting, investigation, and prosecution of sexual violence crimes, and bringing perpetrators to trial at national, regional, and international levels as appropriate and necessary. And in the course, a zero-tolerance approach should be taken. In this regard, it must be emphasized that sexual crimes should not be subject to amnesty in the context of conflict resolution processes as stipulated in the Security Council Resolution 1820 adopted in 2008. In this regard, I welcome the development of the Murad Code, named after Nadia, which will serve as an important tool for the international community to increase accountability for conflict-related sexual crimes. Third, we should empower victims and survivors to become key stakeholders and agents of change in the full continuum of peace process. Victims of sexual violence, mainly women, are highly likely to be exposed to repeated violence, secondary trauma, or re-victimization. They must be given access to care and services that empower them to overcome the victimhood and participate fully, equally, and meaningfully in conflict prevention, management, resolution, and peace building. Empowered women, especially victims and survivors of the terrible crimes in armed conflict, are key to the resilience of societies emerging from conflict to stay the course of peace. My government places great emphasis on advancing women's participation in the security sector and decision-making processes, and this is a key element in Korea's National Action Plan on Resolution 1325, which we are now preparing for the new action plan for 2021 to 23. In Korea, women leaders and civil society have played a major role as activists and agents of change in building an effective response to conflict-related sexual violence. So taking this opportunity, I would like to express my gratitude to these champions, many of whom are here with us today. They have the full ears and support of my government. Many of them have served on the advisory committee of our Action with Women and Peace initiative, and we owe much of its success so far to their invaluable insights and advice. And recently, my government has appointed Ms. Cho Young-suk, who is one of the committee members, as Ambassador for Gender Equality. She will be moderating the first session of today's meeting. And in this and other ways, my government is ready to further expand cooperation with civil society to advance the women, peace, and security agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all too aware that there is still a long way to go before sexual violence in conflict is effectively stamped out across the world. The pandemic seems to have made the work even more arduous, but surely that should not diminish our determination and focus on the women, peace, and security agenda. Indeed, the pandemic has underscored the importance of and the need for human solidarity and dignity around the world. And in the end, that is also the aim of our work, to support and honor the victims and survivors of sexual violence in conflict and crisis. And I'm very confident that your discussions today, as brief as they may be, will make a very rich contribution to this endeavor. My government will remain a strong and committed partner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Kang, for opening up our conference with your insightful and constructive remarks. Moving on, we have many distinguished speakers joined from overseas to congratulate us for the opening of this conference. First, we are going to listen to the congratulatory remarks from Her Excellency Michelle Bachelet, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
I am honored to address you today at this important event. Allow me to congratulate Madam Kyung-Hwa Kang for gathering all of us together at this critical time to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on efforts to tackle conflict-related sexual violence, as well as strategies to support survivors. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 and the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. Both had groundbreaking ambitions for gender equality. However, with the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, the limited gains made in the past decades are at risk of being rolled back, with the rights and prospects of women and girls sidelined in the urgency of finding immediate solutions. In conflict situations, COVID-19 and its associated response measures have not deterred parties to the conflict from using sexual violence as part of their tactics. In this regard, together with other heads of UN entities, I have called on all parties to conflicts to commit to ceasing such acts as part of the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Experts have reported that the compounded effects of COVID-19 in these conflict settings will increase the rates of other forms of gender-based violence, such as child marriage and sexual exploitation, while survivors of gender-based violence have seen an increase in their hurdles to access services and justices and accountability. In South Sudan, for example, movement restrictions aimed at preventing the spread of the pandemic, along with fears of infection, have prevented survivors of sexual violence in accessing sexual and reproductive health and services. And yet, another impediment to progress in this area is the acute funding shortfalls for sexual and gender-based violence assistance in conflict and humanitarian settings worldwide. I believe that survivors must be the drivers of our strategy to support them during and after COVID-19. Their meaningful participation in the design and implementation of our response, be it to provide services or to promote judicial accountability, is critical. I am convinced that to effectively support survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, we need sustained, coordinated, and comprehensive measures to address their physical, psychological, socioeconomic, and legal assistance needs, as well as to mitigate the risk of further violence. Colleagues, we are living in a historic junction, one of opportunity to reshape the world into a more just, equal, and sustainable one. A time to push for transforming the deeply entrenched gender social norms that have posed obstacles to women's rights and gender equality. Let the crisis be an opportunity to heed the lessons learned from the past and prompt action to continue advancing gender equality and the women, peace, and security agenda. I wish you all a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your words, High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet. And now we will welcome the Honorable Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon from United Kingdom, Minister of State and the Prime Minister's Special Representative on Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict, for his congratulatory remarks. He is now with us virtually. Minister, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and good morning from London, and good evening to you joining us in Seoul and elsewhere in Asia. May I say how deeply honored I am to join you on this incredible occasion, and my congratulations to the Republic of Korea on the organization of the second Seoul International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. May I begin by thanking our gracious hosts, and it's great to see Foreign Minister Kang again, albeit virtually, and I look forward to connecting with you in the near future. But in congratulating you, Foreign Minister, may I also thank you for your incredible personal leadership on issues relating to women, peace, and security. And I also extend my thanks to all of your team for gathering the international community here today to reaffirm our collective, not just ambition, but commitment to move forward the vital work towards the prevention of conflict-related sexual violence and the global implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. And it would be remiss of me not to mention your excellent ambassador, Her Excellency Anna Park, here in the United Kingdom, as a partner with the UK on this important agenda and in strengthening our work bilaterally. As we've already heard from you, Foreign Minister, tragically, COVID-19 has exacerbated the horrors faced by those affected by conflict-related sexual violence. Crucial medical and psychological services are under threat as governments, understandably in some cases, divert resources towards the COVID response. Restrictions on movement limit physical routes for survivors to report crimes or even move to areas of safety. And that is why today I pledge this, that the United Kingdom continues and will collaborate further to further strengthen and prioritize the work and champion the cause of survivors worldwide. And it's been a real pleasure over a number of years to work very closely with incredible advocates of this agenda, including our great friends, champions, SRSG Patton, and UNHCR Special Envoy Angelina Jolie. And it's great to be joining them at this event today. Turning back in recent years, in April 2019, I advocated for the UN Security Council Resolution 2467, working very closely with like-minded countries under the then German presidency of the UN Security Council. And it's great to work with the likes of other partners, and I pay tribute to the stewardship of my good friend, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, in that resolution. That we came together on conflict-related sexual violence, and specifically and importantly, as we've heard from Foreign Minister Kang, the inclusion of language on the importance of a survivor-centered approach. This should not be underestimated. This resolution was a significant achievement and demonstrated how we, together, the international community, can come together, notwithstanding different perspectives, and instigate real change. In 2019, therefore, we also appointed, and I'm proud of the fact, of the great advice, insights I get from two incredible survivors who advise me directly as the Prime Minister's Special Representative on preventing sexual violence, Nadine Tunasi and Kolabasia Hasu, who help us in planning policy and strategy on this important agenda. And in June, on the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict, I launched the first draft of the Murad Code. This code was developed with Nadia's initiative, and I'm truly delighted to join again Nadia Murad, who has become a friend, but I'm sure I speak for everyone at this conference and beyond. We join together in pay tribute to her courage and her strong advocacy on this important agenda. And turning to the code itself, it can help to ensure future efforts to secure justice and, importantly, accountability are both survivor-centered, but also safer and more effective. In particular, survivors' needs must be protected when they give evidence. They go through the most horrendous ordeals, and when they come forward with courage, it is important we work together to afford them the protection they duly deserve. Nadia, you are an inspiration to us all, and we look forward to further strengthening our collaboration on this important initiative. We aim to publish the final code next year, and I hope all international partners will endorse it in due course, so it becomes a standard form of engagement. In July this year, I was also pleased to speak at the UN Security Council open debate on conflict-related sexual violence, where I announced the UK's £1.3 million contribution to the Global Survivors Fund, launched by Nadia and her fellow Nobel laureate, the courageous Dr. Mukwege. And again, I join with others, I'm sure, in paying tribute to his continued commitment, leadership, but also courage on this important agenda. I'm sure Dr. Mukwege will talk further about the fund and how it has supported efforts to strengthen wider reforms of restorative justice for survivors in the DRC and indeed globally. And we are also focused on supporting children born of sexual violence. Those are innocent victims. They deserve our support. And we will soon launch a draft model framework for global online consultation. Our intention behind this is simple, that will ultimately set the gold standard of care and support. And we hope that colleagues, member states will use it as a basis to develop their own national action plans. And we will share more information with you all very soon. And last week, I was pleased to launch the Declaration of Humanity at the annual Freedom of Religion or Belief Ministerial hosted virtually in Poland. This declaration has a simple aim. It calls for an end to sexual violence and conflict and denounces the stigma faced by survivors, including children born of rape. It is wrong, it is fundamentally flawed that women, children, and yes, men as well, who go through the most horrendous ordeal, then have to suffer stigma of rejection by their own communities, by their own faith groups. And therefore, I was truly delighted to see the strong support of international faith leaders and belief groups who came together to unite against the challenge the damaging societal norms and call for support, not stigma, a rejection of stigma, support for survivors of sexual violence internationally, and support for children born of such heinous crimes. I therefore urge delegates here today to draw attention to the declaration, and we will be happy to distribute and circulate more information in this regard. As we've heard from you, Foreign Minister Kang, there is so much more still to be done on this agenda, and I pay tribute to Korea's leadership. Today's second Seoul International Conference provides an opportunity for us all to take stock of what progress has been made, but where we are as an international community as well, and the need to increase our efforts. Now more than ever, as the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated, we need to come together to ensure that all women and children are fully protected and able to participate fully in secure and stable societies across the world. I often say, when asked the reason why, well, why is simple. It is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to happen, and we must work together in pursuit of this aim. I'm therefore pleased that many of us are advocating and working together on these issues, and I duly hope that we really can continue to build the collaboration, strengthen relationships that really have a real and lasting impact, and importantly, put survivors at the heart of our policy and programs. Therefore, today, I wish you every success with today's conference. I look forward to seeing the outcomes of your discussions, but also importantly, working with all of you in further strengthening our cooperation and collaboration on this important agenda. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much, Minister Lord Ahmad, for your time and warm-hearted remarks. Up next, we will now welcome His Excellency Niels Zanen, Minister of State at the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, for his congratulatory remarks. He's also now with us virtually. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, really like to congratulate Foreign Minister Kang and congratulate Korea on hosting this conference. COVID-19 exacerbates gender-based violence all over the world and particularly in fragile settings. Addressing a survivor-based centered approach could not be more timely. By adopting Resolution 1325 in 2000, the Security Council called on all parties to armed conflict, and I quote, to take specific measures to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, and stressed the need for states to put an end to impunity. 20 years later, we have to realize that this particularly horrific form of violence is still a common practice in conflicts around the world. The annual report by the UN Secretary General on sexual violence and conflict gives a gruesome account of the spread of this crime. The fact that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, is joining us today correctly reflects this is a security issue and a human rights issue at the same time. I would like, therefore, to congratulate Spain and the core group for successfully introducing a resolution on women, peace and security in the Human Rights Council on the occasion of this anniversary. We must continue to work hard to protect civilians from sexual violence. Under our presidency, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 2467 in April 2019. And as you all know, the resolution urges member states to do more consistently hold perpetrators to account. It urges the Security Council to make better and more active use of sanctions to deter these heinous crimes. In both respects, there are some positive developments, including 3 new listings by the Security Council, but in both respects, there is a lot of scope to do more. Resolution 2467 also anchors a survivor-centered approach in the women, peace and security agenda. It is a critical step towards ensuring that survivors of sexual violence get the help and the support they clearly needed. Germany, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, has integrated the survivor-centered approach into our work in conflict regions. We support initiatives by IOM and the Mukwege Foundation to develop redress and reparation measures. We support, for example, Medica Mondiale in their crucial work with survivors. And we fund the development of clinical guidelines for the development of all survivors, including men and boys. However, 1.5 years after the adoption of the resolution and 20 years after the adoption of Resolution 1325, we see little progress in overcoming conflict-related sexual violence. There is so much at stake. Sexual violence does not only destroy women and men, girls and boys. It also destroys families, entire communities. In many conflict and post-conflict countries, sexual violence has become so common that it will take entire generations before people can live without fear of violence again. That is directly opposed to our idea of a democratic, stable, and secure society. It is a threat to peace and security. Investing in the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, therefore, also means investing in the stability of societies. Excellencies, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, during extensive travel in, for example, Afghanistan, but all over the Middle East, I have spoken to survivors of sexual violence. The stories of suffering of the survivors only hint at the horror that women, girls, boys, and also men went through. However, what impressed me most of the conversations with the survivors is the courage and determination with which many stand up and tell their stories. Our job is to act upon it. For Germany, this means continuing our multilateral work for the equal participation of women in peace and security and protection from sexual violence and conflicts. In fragile contexts, Germany addresses impunity and effectively supports survivors of sexual violence. Cooperation with women peace builders, women human rights defenders, and other civil society is particularly important to us. This is why we support, for example, a shelter for human rights defenders and women peace builders in Kabul, and fund amazing work of civil society all over the world in preventing and overcoming sexual violence and supporting survivors. Support for survivors also include ensuring their sexual and reproductive rights and their access to sexual and reproductive health services that ensure safe and effective treatment. There has been, we all know that, a considerable pushback on this issue, and we also experienced that on the Security Council. Achievements made over decades are being questioned. We must courageously oppose those backlashes. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me again congratulate Korea on hosting this important conference. I wish the conference all success. Thank you very much, and all the best from Berlin.
Thank you very much, Minister Anen, for your congratulatory message. Up next, we will now welcome Her Excellency Jacqueline O'Neill from Canada, Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, for her congratulatory remarks. She is also joining us online. Ambassador, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and hello from Ottawa, Canada. As Canada's Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, it's my great honor to bring best wishes from the Government of Canada and our Minister of Foreign Affairs in particular, the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne. It's a great privilege to join you today, even if we're not together in person, to greet this event's many excellent speakers, to join all people online, including our young participants, in welcoming you. And it's also my great pleasure to greet my own counterpart, Cho Young-suk, Korea's Ambassador for Gender Equality. I'm just delighted that she is in this role and that, like me, she comes to the role from civil society, reinforcing the essential contributions between community groups, civil society, and governments. We are deeply grateful to our Korean friends for providing this opportunity for us to come together once again. This is a moment globally where we are experiencing unprecedented restrictions and hardships and disruptions from the pandemic. And around the world, we are sharing so many of these experiences. And tragically, we are seeing rises in domestic violence everywhere in the world, not just in one region or another, but everywhere, including in Canada. And I often hear people talk about lessons learned from this pandemic. But I'm always very quick to note that perhaps we can only at this point talk about lessons observed, because we don't yet know that they will be reflected back into our systems. And this is our collective challenge, to make sure that what is so glaringly obvious during this pandemic is noted and that we change our behavior, our policies, and our institutions as a result. It's to really note, as Foreign Minister Kang described in her very powerful opening, that we see what this harsh light is exposing. We have a moment in which we can seize the opportunities presented by disruption on this massive and global scale. And not least, this is an opportunity to fundamentally redefine what we mean when we say security. This pandemic can be the reminder that we need to broaden our understanding of what makes us secure. That all of the guns and tanks and weapons in the world mean nothing if people are starving to death, if they die from diseases that could be prevented or treated if there was a functional health system, if people are beaten by intimate partners in their home, or if they experience sexual violence in conflict, in crisis, or any other time. And as we work in our communities, our countries, and with each other around the world to move forward and build better systems and responses, we have to do so with the voices of diverse women and young people at decision-making tables. And we must put at the center of our discussions voices of survivors and voices from communities. Being at the center, of course, means designing the rest of the table and setting the agenda, not just being included once everything else is settled. So my Canadian colleagues and I look forward to listening and learning today and working together for many years to come. Thank you so much for this opportunity to participate, and best wishes to all for productive discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your warm remarks. Next, we will hear from several distinguished speakers who will share their valuable insight on our conference's theme, Ending Sexual Violence in Conflict and Ensuring a Survivor-Centered Approach. The first two keynote speakers are Ms. Pramila Patten, the UN Secretary General's Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, and Dr. Mukwege, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate and the director of Panzi Hospital, special advisor of the Mukwege Foundation, and co-founder of the Global Survivors Fund.
Your Excellency Mrs. Kung-Hwa Kang, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, distinguished conference participants, ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate the Republic of Korea on convening the second International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. This effort to reinforce global partnership to end sexual violence in conflict is a sign of hope at a harrowing moment for humanity when so many women are battling the effects of a pandemic, compounded by the impact of conflict and gender-based inequality. I am honored to lend my voice to this initiative, which shines a spotlight on a scourge that is already underreported and risks being further eclipsed. Sexual violence both predates and outlasts any conflict or crisis. Just as more civilians perish from the effects of war than soldiers die in battle, we know from past epidemics that more women die from the lack of access to services, including reproductive health care, than from the disease itself. In July of last year, on the occasion of the first international conference, we came together in Seoul to deliver on the promise of Security Council Resolution 2467, which called for a survivor-centered approach to inform all prevention and response efforts. Such an approach recognizes that survivors are not just stories or statistics. They bring lived experience that must inform the search for solutions, including decisions about policy programming and resource allocation. This is an approach that empowers survivors by prioritizing their rights, needs, and aspirations, and safeguards them from re-traumatization or reprisals. Even in the midst of a global pandemic, women's rights and needs cannot be put on pause, and neither can our response. Last year in Seoul, I outlined the major advances of the past decade to combat sexual violence as a tactic of war and terror, a tool of political repression, and a driver of forced displacement. These include the evolution of a robust normative framework, the establishment of effective institutional arrangements, and enhanced operational impact, which has enabled us to reach and support thousands of survivors who had once been invisible and inaccessible. I took stock of the range of commitments made by affected countries and a number of non-state armed groups in the framework of my mandate. These followed political engagements and field missions to settings such as the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, Mali, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Bangladesh. 1 year on, where do our efforts stand? Recent months have seen a number of significant developments, including a convergence of milestone anniversaries. In October 2019, I commemorated the 10-year anniversary of my mandate by holding a survivors hearing at United Nations headquarters in the spirit of bridging political leaders on the world stage with frontline actors in theaters of war and connecting the treetops of high diplomacy with women at the grassroots. This event demonstrated that our greatest models of political courage are often those who have the least access to power and resources and face the highest risk. One survivor who spoke at the event, an indigenous woman from Guatemala, said, "We do not want history to repeat itself. We are working for progress so that our children and grandchildren never have to experience what we suffered." A survivor of ISIL captivity from Iraq said, "These criminals were not held accountable. I described their faces, I gave their names, but they were not prosecuted. I feel fear knowing that they are still free. A survivor from the DRC noted that we often hear that educating a woman is educating the whole nation. But have we understood that destroying a woman means destroying the whole community? In shaping my agenda, I stand guided by their perspectives and will continue to amplify their voices. This year, on 19th of June, we mark the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict, with a commemoration focused on the impact of COVID-19 and how UN actors in the field have adapted and innovated to meet this challenge. 3 key recommendations emerged, which remain urgent in the COVID era and its aftermath. Firstly, all parties to conflict must immediately cease all forms of sexual violence as part of the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire. Secondly, sexual and gender-based violence response services must be designated as essential services in order to prevent their deprioritization and defunding. And thirdly, efforts to address sexual and gender-based violence should be integrated into national COVID-19 response plans, including proactive measures to broadcast information to the most vulnerable. Women's groups around the world were among the first to echo the call for a global ceasefire to focus on public health. Yet, we continue to invest far more in the instruments of war than the foundations of peace and human welfare. This October, we mark the 20th anniversary of the Foundational Resolution on Women, Peace and Security, Resolution 1325. The adoption of this framework forever changed the face of peace and security. It forced us to recognize that no crisis is gender neutral, and no effective response can be gender blind. This framework not only set out a problem, but also presented a transformative solution. It recognized that inclusive peace is sustainable peace. It recognized that gender equality bolsters social stability, whereas sexual violence normalizes and entrenches aggression, setting back both the cause of equality and the cause of peace. On this occasion, the emphasis was rightly placed on accelerating implementation, turning aspirations into obligations and resolutions into results. In 2020, we also celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and the 75th anniversary of the United Nations itself, with its founding charter promise of equality between women and men. These occasions brought into focus many areas of unfinished business, such as gender-responsive security sector reform, access to justice and reparations, comprehensive service delivery, and shifting harmful social norms around stigma, shame, and victim blame. It also became clear we cannot be bound by business as usual. Building back better in the wake of this crisis will require an inclusive, intersectional, and gender-informed approach that leaves no one behind. This will mean considering the diverse realities of refugees and IDPs, ethnic minorities, indigenous and rural communities, people living with disabilities, LGBTQI individuals, and other marginalized groups, while restoring faith in national institutions and in multilateral cooperation. As abhorrent and anachronistic as it sounds, sexual violence and sexual slavery persist as part of the 21st century wars. Spoilers to the peace continue to treat women's bodies as the spoils of war. Rape is still characterized by staggering rates of impunity and recidivism, which breeds further violence and corrodes social cohesion. It is time to move from commitments to compliance. It is time to ensure survivors can shape their own future and participate fully in political, economic, and social life. Yet, as I have seen firsthand in remote, war-torn corners of the world, too many women and girls remain unsafe under their own roofs when night falls. As former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan said so rousingly in 1997 in calling for the establishment of an international criminal court, we will do our part and ask that you do yours in the struggle to ensure that no ruler, no state, no junta, and no army anywhere can abuse human rights with impunity. Only then will the innocents of distant wars and conflicts know that they too may sleep under the cover of justice. Let us join hands and join forces to bring that vision into reality for survivors of wartime sexual violence everywhere. Thank you.
Excellence, Madame la Ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République de Corée du Sud. Honorables, Excellences, distingués invités, Mesdames et Messieurs, je tiens tout d'abord à remercier Son Excellence Madame la Ministre Kyung-Hwa Kang pour son soutien inlassable à notre travail à l'hôpital de Panzi et à la Fondation Panzi depuis plus d'une décennie. À l'issue de la première conférence, au mois de juillet 2019, nous faisions le constat plein de promesses de l'évolution de la mobilisation contre les violences sexuelles à l'échelle planétaire. Ensemble, ici à Séoul, avec les survivantes de viols originaires de divers pays du monde, nous nous promettions de renforcer tous les instruments à notre disposition pour un plaidoyer encore plus fort. Hélas, nous ignorions qu'à peine 5 mois après, la pandémie de Covid-19 allait changer totalement le monde, changer nos modes de vie et surtout, avec le confinement à domicile, renforcer les violences sexuelles envers les femmes. Cela a fait dire à la directrice de l'ONU Femmes que la violence sexuelle à l'égard des femmes était une pandémie fantôme aux côtés de la Covid-19. Mesdames et messieurs, cette deuxième conférence a retenu toute notre attention car elle entre en résonance avec notre travail quotidien de prise en charge des victimes de violences sexuelles à Panzi. Le modèle d'assistance holistique que nous avons mis sur pied depuis plus de 20 ans est basé sur 4 piliers: médical, psychologique, socio-économique et légal. Ce modèle, qui s'est fait en One Stop Center, vise à offrir aux femmes des services intégrés dans un même lieu en réponse à leurs besoins, sans discrimination ni stigmatisation. Ce traitement centré sur la victime, il est le fruit d'une mise en place progressive des services dictés par le besoin des patientes. L'objectif ultime de cette prise en charge est d'outiller les femmes à développer leurs capacités à redevenir autonomes et à transformer leur peine en pouvoir. Ceci traduit exactement comment les femmes qui ont été meurtries peuvent devenir de véritables actrices, non seulement de la société, mais des actrices pour la paix. Mesdames et messieurs, en matière de réponse aux violences sexuelles, nous savons que les survivantes ont besoin de soins globaux centrés sur la personne. Malheureusement, dans plusieurs pays du monde aujourd'hui, de nombreuses victimes n'ont même pas accès à des services minima. Une prise en charge holistique doit être considérée comme un droit humain à la réhabilitation pour toutes les survivantes. Nous aspirons à ce que ces modèles soient dupliqués partout où les femmes souffrent des conséquences des violences sexuelles avec le soutien de la communauté internationale. Mais il ne suffira pas seulement de soigner les victimes pour mettre fin aux violences sexuelles. Si nous voulons mettre un terme aux violences sexuelles qui ont augmenté de manière significative partout dans le monde depuis la crise du Covid-19, la communauté internationale, nous-mêmes et les États, nous devons redoubler d'efforts pour lutter contre l'impunité dont jouissent les auteurs des viols et des violences basées sur le genre. Pourtant, c'est le maillon faible de toutes les stratégies de lutte contre les violences sexuelles et de protection des survivantes. Nous ne manquons ni de normes internationales, ni de lois efficaces, mais elles sont que peu ou pas appliquées. Ce climat d'impunité pour les crimes à caractère sexuel envoie malheureusement aux bourreaux le message qu'ils ont les champs libres pour poursuivre leur forfait sur le corps des femmes, des jeunes filles et voire même des enfants. Je réitère donc mon appel aux États et à la communauté internationale à tracer une ligne rouge contre l'utilisation du viol comme arme de guerre. Une ligne rouge qui serait synonyme de sanctions économiques, politiques et de poursuites judiciaires contre les criminels et les instigateurs de ces crimes odieux. Je vous exhorte à entreprendre des actions à l'échelle locale, nationale, continentale et mondiale pour mettre fin à l'impunité d'un des crimes les plus anciens de notre humanité. Une des grandes leçons de la gestion des conflits dans le monde est que sans la justice, il n'y aura pas de paix durable, autant pour les survivantes que pour les populations. Et sans réparation pour les survivantes, il n'y aura pas la restauration de la dignité. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much for a very powerful speech, Special Representative Patton and Dr. Mukwege. Moving on, we will listen to a keynote speech from Ms. Nadia Murad, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the founder of the Nadia Initiative, and the co-founder of the Global Survivors Fund. She's also now with us virtually. Ms. Murad, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to the Republic of Korea and to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kang Kwa, for having me. I am honored to be speaking today at such an important event alongside my colleagues and friends. Your efforts to end sexual violence in conflict and protect survivors are inspiring. Since the advent of warfare, women have been particularly vulnerable to conflict-related sexual violence. Men have weaponized the use of sexual violence against women to destroy entire communities from within. These horrific crimes are only possible because women are seen as objects, as weapons of war. They are abused for profit, power, and destruction. This causes trauma that can unravel the social fabric of communities for many generations. In 2014, ISIS militants invaded Sinjar, Iraq, and kidnapped over 6,000 Yazidi women and children, forcing them into sexual slavery. They did this with the intention of eradicating all Yazidis from Iraq. These attempts at ethnic cleansing through targeted sexual violence reflected those committed against the Rohingya in Myanmar, the Tutsis in Rwanda, and the Bosnians in the Yugoslavia wars. What do all these communities have in common? They were made vulnerable by years of persecution and marginalization. Vulnerable communities around the world have been direct targets of both regional and global conflicts, but are often seen as collateral damage. Today, over 2,800 Yazidi women and children are still missing in captivity. For the past 6 years, the international community has left them in the hands of their captors. In a post-conflict region like Iraq, survivors need to play an active role in the peace-building process. Survivors know best what they need to heal and recover. Efforts to engage survivors at every level of their recovery serve to empower them, restore their agency, and reestablish a sense of community. Preventing sexual violence in conflict means proactively fighting for global gender equality. Promoting and enabling more women to fill leadership roles in critical to shifting the global narrative around gender equality and empowering women and girls. When more women are in decision-making positions, policies and legislation often reflect changes needed to ensure the protection and promotion of women's rights. But this is not enough to create systematic change. Systematic change and prevention of sexual violence will come when we comprehensively reform our education systems. Gender bias and stereotypes are often learned and amplified in school settings. Education is key to addressing the root causes of sexual violence and to ending practices of toxic femininity and masculinity. If these issues are addressed from a young age, we will begin to see a world where women will occupy positions of power at the same rate as men and will know that they too belong in these spaces. With access to wide-reaching platforms, it is up to global leaders at every level to make space, listen, and elevate the voices of women and survivors of sexual violence. Only then will we be able to make progress with equitable education, legislation, and survivor support toward a more just and peaceful world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nadia Murad, for your motivational speech. And last but not least, Ms. Angelina Jolie, Special Envoy of UNHCR, will share her keynote speech via a video clip.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I thank the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Korea for her leadership in holding this conference, and it is an honor to join Nadia Murad and Dr. Denis Mukwege, who speak with such moral authority and experience on this issue. I want to begin by acknowledging the many women who are imprisoned or under attack for claiming their rights, who would have had every right to speak to you today but cannot. Women prisoners of conscience everywhere. Women human rights defenders killed for exposing corruption. Women murdered for reporting domestic violence. And young girls burned to death for naming their abusers. Shame on any government that incarcerates women for seeking their rights. And shame on anyone who hides behind the notions of religion, culture, or masculinity to justify or cover up violence against women and children. The truth is, a woman's life does not rank equally with a man's far more universally than we are willing to acknowledge. Conflict-related sexual violence is a manifestation of this reality. It seems we believe in rights for women and girls only to a point. In our daily lives, to the point that it might force us to see something we don't wish to see and have to act upon it. In politics, to the point that it doesn't compete with vested interests. In our foreign policy, to the point that it doesn't conflict with business and trade. At the Security Council, to the point that a P5 member chooses to cast a veto to shield an ally, no matter how bloody their hands. And in settling conflicts, the rights of women and girls matter, to the point that we can declare success and move on. It is this caring to a point that means that gender equality is still at least a century away. That domestic violence has grown sharply worse during the pandemic, and that the number of people displaced by conflict and persecution, over half of them women and children, has doubled in a decade. So my question to every government taking part in this conference is this: do you truly intend to prevent and address sexual violence in all its manifestations, in all contexts, or will you only commit to a point? I say this not to discourage progress, but to invite honesty. Impunity for sexual violence in conflict has got worse, as our willingness to resolve and prevent conflict has weakened. We need to be brutally honest about this. We know what needs to be done. We need to recognize crimes of sexual violence in conflict in all peace and mediation processes, exclude them from amnesty provisions, and hold perpetrators account. We must prioritize and fund sexual violence programs in all conflict and humanitarian settings, including sexual and reproductive health services and protection programs. We must provide comprehensive care for female, male, and child victims, including children born of rape, such as health services, safe shelters, and access to justice. We must enable women to participate in all decision-making, including, I would stress, forcibly displaced and stateless women and girls. We have to change military and police training and doctrine and help states to build their own capacity to gather evidence and mount prosecutions. And finally, we must protect, not persecute, human rights defenders. There's nothing new here. 5 years ago, over 150 countries endorsed a UN declaration promising to do these things. These are all actions in our power. And I urge anyone listening to ask their government what they have done to live up to these commitments. Because half measures will not work. The lack of accountability will lead to more violence and put stability further and further out of reach. Cutting humanitarian aid because of the pandemic, as some governments are reportedly considering, will lead to more movement of refugees and more women and children at risk. It is time to speak the truth about the consequences of our actions, or lack of them. Young people, in particular, expect this from us. And most of all, it is what survivors deserve. The bravery of victims of rape who face stigma and retaliation, yet still have the courage to speak out about their experiences and fight for others, demands equal courage from all of us. Above all, it demands courage from those in positions of power and responsibility, and a willingness to be honest and humble about the work that lies ahead. For in the end, the only point of all our efforts, the only real measure of success, will be if they lead to change that survivors can see and feel in their own lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Angelina Jolie, for your insightful speech. This brings us to the end of the opening ceremony of the Second International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. I'd like to reiterate my deepest thanks to our distinguished speakers for your strong support and meaningful messages for today's conference and our AWP initiative. And thank you everyone for your attention. Now, we are going to take a short 5-minute break at the point. The first session will start promptly after the break. I will meet you here again in 5 minutes. Thank you.